Okay, welcome back everyone to youtube.com/Ryan's Vedic Astrology, the Asheville Vedic Astrology.com channel. I'm here once again with Channing Ayers of Asheville Vedic Astrology. Hi Channing, how you doing?
Hi Ryan, hi everybody.
And today we're going to be talking about some interesting things, specifically some of the most important transits that will be coming up in 2020 with the cluster of planets in Capricorn and what that may mean metaphysically, and also what it may mean for the world at large, because Channing's been doing a lot of research into this, and she's been going back to previous times using her software, Kala Vedic Astrology software, to see what was going on historically when this massive conglomeration of planets came together throughout history. So we've got a lot to talk about. We're going to go into the nodes of certain planets. So not just the nodes Rahu and Ketu, but also the nodes of certain planets that are involved in this series of transits. We're going to talk about what the transits themselves mean. And we're also going to aim to look at, again, the metaphysical understanding of it. This may end up taking a few videos. So our goal is to get it all in one, but if we don't, we'll let you know, and you can stay tuned, and we'll make it a series on this channel. So, all right, Channing. So before we get started, why don't you go ahead and let people know what are the transits? What are the planetary positions that we are thinking about here? What's it all about?
Right. Okay. Well, yeah, I noticed these transits coming up, flipping into Kala in the future, maybe 10 years ago or something. And I have been contemplating what this might be, because I realize this isn't a transit that you're seeing every day. This isn't a transit that's very common. And what's going to be happening, what's already starting to happen, because the nodes just moved into a new sign. So we have Ketu moving into the sign of Capricorn. We have Saturn already in the sign of Capricorn. We have the outer planet Pluto in the sign of Capricorn. And then in about a year from now, we're going to have the planet Jupiter moving into the sign of Capricorn. So that was just interesting to me to see the South Node and Saturn and Pluto, which has its own certain energy, Jupiter and Saturn, which has its own imprint, Ketu and Saturn, all of these planets coming together in this one sign of Capricorn. So that it's just been in my mind, it's just been in my consciousness about how could this present itself? What does this mean for the world? And, here we are in 2018, and we might be able to begin to start drawing some connections.
Right. And we are doing this video on November 8th of 2018, for those of you who are interested. And the planets you were talking about were Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter, Ketu. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I've accidentally got my screen set to 2019 for some reason. Let me go back to that. There we go. So Jupiter, Ketu, Saturn, Pluto, and it looks like on January 1st, 2020, the sun is also going to be in Capricorn, as well as Mercury too. But we're focusing primarily on the slower moving planets, right?
Well, when the sun comes into the sign of Capricorn, that's going to be the time frame of the eclipses.
Right.
So one of the significant impacts that this transit has is that we do have the south node of the moon involved in it, which gives it the eclipse energy. So when the sun and the moon become involved, there we go, boom, there's triggers, there's eclipses happening. So that's part of what makes this such an interesting conjunction, because we all know the nodes are so interesting.
Right. So it's not just, we're not just looking at this as Saturn, Jupiter, and the nodes. It's also the fact that all this is happening at the same time that the sun is going to cause eclipses within the chart. Okay. So that's another topic we're going to go into as well, correct? How the eclipses are going to play out through that.
Yeah, we can get deep. We can get a little bit deeper into the nature of the eclipses. So that's kind of fun too, because eclipses are just such an interesting topic.
Right. So I know you've got a lot of research in front of you. I've heard you shuffling papers quite a bit before we got started. Where do you think a good place to start would be? Do you want to get into the historical aspect first, or the metaphysical?
let's talk a little bit about Capricorn.
Okay.
Capricorn itself is the theme. Not only Capricorn, but the polarity of Capricorn Cancer.
Mm-hmm.
So these are whenever we have eclipses, we're going to have two different signs kind of pushing on each other or in opposition to each other, because this is how the nodes work. We're focusing on one and focusing on another, and Rahu, the north node of the moon, is going to be in opposition, so in the sign of Cancer. And the planets that are all going to be in the sign of Capricorn are going to have a specific energy because they're in that sign. And Saturn rules Capricorn. So the ruler of all these planets is going to be there with the planets. So this is going to have a significant influence as well on how they present themselves.
So is that Ketu then? Do you think it's going to bring out more of the focus on older traditions and dogmas, since it's happening in the sign of Cancer and Capricorn, and Saturn is there? Or do you think it's going to be more about challenging those? Because when I think about it, if we've got Saturn in its own sign with one of the nodes, it almost seems to strengthen Saturn's more traditionalist approach rather than breaking it. But I know a lot of people kind of get the idea that combination is going to cause some kind of breakthrough in consciousness, or breakthrough in historical, or breakthrough in cultural understanding. Where do you go with it?
Well, that's been my musing, my contemplation, is how is a Saturn going to work? Because what I've been seeing with Saturn and Capricorn is it works both. It works as Saturn, which is a separating element, and it also works as the owner of its own house. So it's a manifesting element. So it has the dual nature of Saturn in it, and it's separating and able to build and manifest. So Saturn in the sign is going to want to build structure. It's going to want to build rules and traditions, and the very physical manifestation of Capricorn. Capricorn's an earth sign, so there's a real tangible manifesting energy to this. What is this going to build? And at the same time, we have Pluto. Pluto is a destructive, breaking down the ego.
Right.
Water planet. Ketu, a dissolving element that wants us to transition.
Right.
We also have the south nodes of Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter involved in this one too. So we have the planetary south nodes, which represent the whole orbit of that planet, that whole cycle of that planet, and it's coming to its conjunction with itself. So Pluto conjuncts its own south node, Saturn conjuncts its own south node, Jupiter conjuncts its own south node. So there's a sense of some type of completion. There's a sense of some type of dissolving, while there's also a restructuring, a rebuilding happening.
Well, Jupiter is also the 12th Lord from the sign of Capricorn, so that adds to it as well. So, all right, so you're looking at it because of all these kind of dissolving factors as being a more of a dissolution, a dissolving of old ways or old traditions or old understandings.
I definitely think it has that energy of dissolving factors going on to it. It's an interesting mix because of the power of Saturn to hold on and the power of Saturn to build at the same time that these massive dissolving planets are all coming together. So I'm just very much in contemplation of how this is going to present itself in nature.
Well, it makes me wonder too, because at least at this point in time, when we're having these kinds of elections that are going on, at least in the U.S., and people are they're happy about what changed, but they're also a little disappointed about how it didn't change as quickly as they would have liked. I think I saw someone mention that 1/6 of the government has shifted to the direction we want it to go in, which is a little bit, but not quite what we wanted. And the reason I bring that up is because it makes me wonder about that Jupiter being debilitated there in Capricorn. And Jupiter supports Saturn, right? Because by Logitati Vashta's, Jupiter supports any planet that it's with, but it's in a sign where it seems like it might give the impression that maybe it should be easier than it is actually going to be. You know, like people think that they're going to have to just simply motivate more people to get out and vote. And this is just an example, when really maybe they need to actually do something a little more intense, a little more, that takes a little harder work, that takes a little more sacrifice, you know, and that Jupiter is going to make them think that it's going to be easier than it is. So I was curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, the reason Jupiter is debilitated in Saturn, one of the reasons is just because it has to focus on so much mundane stuff, and Jupiter's more in the realm of ideals and faith and hope. So there's definitely this Saturnian type of burden on Jupiter. Jupiter's not able to necessarily shine the way that it wants to shine in the sign of Capricorn. It becomes very responsible. It becomes
So then people are going to have to sort of maybe put aside their own happiness and their own ideals, and you know, act in a very down-to-earth, Saturnine, get dirty and do the dirty work kind of way.
Right.
And maybe that's how Jupiter could help by giving maybe some grace through that hard work.
Yeah, I think that's the potential of Jupiter being in that sign, is that, you know, if we do our hard work, Jupiter will move. You know, these planets aren't going to stay here forever, but there is a real roll your sleeves up and get down into the dirt, get down into the nitty gritty, sort of do your work while allowing things to dissolve, while allowing things to let go. There's a very strong potential with this lineup, but it's not necessarily going to be easy. You know, this is a more challenging type of energy that is asking every single person to literally do their work.
Right. Or what? What happens if we don't?
Well, you know, the concept also comes back to the work is in moving into Cancer. The work isn't necessarily staying in this Capricornian mindset, but it's being able to transition to where Rahu is. And we're you know, ideally consciousness needs to move into the sign of Cancer, which is more nurturing, more empathy, more understanding the emotional realm of things, more flow, more sensitivity, more security, the things that are sort of being challenged at this point within our countries, where we're really at a crossroads of trying to ask ourselves, who are we as a country, and what are the things that are important to us as a country, and you know, where is the compassion in what we're trying to achieve as a country at whole. And I think that this is a reflection of human consciousness. I don't think it's just in our country. I think this is affecting everywhere.
Right. So this is, well, I don't know if you know the song, and if not, I'll see if I can find the lyrics and post it. It reminds me of the song "Closer to the Heart" by Rush.
Right, right.
With a focus on trying to find a way to live and express more from a heart-centered place, rather than a Capricornian-centered place, which is what? I mean, in a bad sense, the Capricornian side is power and domination and maintaining old ways of doing things for the simple sake of doing them, rather than exploring what's appropriate for the here and now. But I think it's also important to remember that maybe through that Capricornian energy, Capricorn is about solid foundation. It's about being able to build a structure that can support the masses. So it's that balance between, you know, letting go of the power, letting go of that being the defining factor, and moving more towards how can we build a solid foundation through Cancer, such that Capricorn can give that sort of protective, steady, stable base for maybe a new kind of cultural movement to come forth, and hopefully not another nasty warlike culture like happened, earlier on.
Well, that's what I started getting curious about, is what happened the last time? What
Right.
happened the last time that we saw this? Sorry, my dog's barking in the background.
Okay, which dog is that?
One of my rescue dogs that showed up at my doorstep.
Oh, little puppy or the little poodle?
Yeah, the little poodle. But the historical kind of journey that took me on of trying to discover, okay, how long has this been? And that's been interesting to me because I haven't seen a lot of that. It's not something you can just Google or, go into the internet and just type in, I can type in last time Saturn was in Pluto, Pluto was in Capricorn or Saturn was in Capricorn, and I can get an idea of that time frame because we know, it takes that amount of time. But to do the math to figure out when Ketu, Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter were all coming together in this sign.
So it's pre-internet, huh?
It's pre-internet, but it's almost hard to find a lot of the day-to-day information.
Right.
The last conjunction that we had with all four of these planets was in 549.
Okay.
So that's about 1700 years ago.
Right.
Yeah. Let's see. Let's see. Sorry, 1,470 years ago. So 1,470. So a little around, if we rounded it up to about 1,500 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And what we also have to take in consideration that the other outer planets are going to be in different signs. The Nakshatras move through the signs.
Right.
And so each one of these influences is going to change it. It's not going to be exactly the same.
Right.
We're having such unique transits. So
I know you did a lot of research on this, and I'm just curious, did you also look at which nakshatras, for example, this happened, like how is it different, or was that just an observation that you thought of?
No, I looked at the nakshatras a little bit just to see the kind of differences. So we had this, and excuse me if there's somehow I made some mistakes in my math, because I have been sort of doing this by looking through 250-year cycles of Pluto and looking back to when because Pluto's transits are roughly around 250 years, 249 years. So
don't worry. If you've made a mistake, I'm sure there's an internet troll out there that will let you know.
Okay, great. And if anyone else has anything to add to this, I think it's such a fascinating subject and could be ongoing research. But so this happened in 550, 549. So we had, right now, this one that's happening in 2020 is going to be happening in Uttarashad.
Okay.
The last one that happened in 550, part of it was in Uttarashad and part of it was in Dhanishta.
Okay.
The time before that I found that it happened was around 47, the year 47, and that was in Shravana.
Year 47.
Year 47,
okay.
Like right after the crucifixion of Christ and the beginning of that age, yeah. And then we have the year 1425, 1424 BCE. So that goes into the negative years.
Okay.
That was in Dhanishta. And then 3602 BCE, so that was in Uttara Bhadrapada. And then we go back into negative 5072. That's as far as I've gone back, and that's in Ashwini, which is
okay. So was that 5 total that you've gone back, or 4?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5.
Okay. All right. Well, that's pretty good. And is that all the times that this has happened between now and then?
That's what I've found so far, just sitting there kind of doing it by hand. The last one that I saw was the 549, and then 47, and then it starts getting into the negative numbers. So we're going further back. So
then this is the 6th within the last 8,000 years, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is about the 6th time that these planets, and in those times, Jupiter isn't always involved. What I started looking at was more of the Pluto, Saturn, Ketu in Capricorn conjunction, because those are the planets that I felt like had such a strong impact. I wanted to see how that would look. And then also going back and seeing a few of those times with Jupiter in it. But the last one that we had, that Jupiter was actually in I think was the 549.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
that's quite a ways back.
Yeah.
And so I know we've talked about this both when we were at Ernst's in Arizona and on other occasions in Asheville. So historically, have you been able to look at like what was going on previously when these kinds of eclipses were occurring?
Yeah, I was doing a little bit of digging in on the internet just to see what that time frame held, and 549, 550 was actually the year that's assigned to moving from the classical period or the age of antiquity into the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
That's like the exact year that they consider the transition.
Okay.
So what we see there is that time frame as being considered a huge shift in collective consciousness from the focus on one type of lifestyle and just human function, human focus, into the Middle Ages, which became defined more by a lot of loss of life, a lot of disease. The plagues started beginning. There were different miniature wars and powers falling and powers being rebuilt at that time. So it was definitely an interesting shifting time frame that we saw.
Well, that was also that would have been during. Tell me the date again. What was the date again?
549.
This is AD though, right?
Yeah, this is AD. So this is about 1,500 years ago.
Okay, so that would have been around the time when we were. For those of you who follow Sri Yukteswar's idea on the yugas, that would have been near the time that we were in that nastiest part of the Dark Ages, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, and I had kind of shot some of these dates out at Ernst, and he said, oh yeah, that's when the tropical zodiac was forgotten and the sidereal zodiac was picked back up or invented or whatever, whatever his mindset is.
Just to aggravate some people, definitely invented.
Yeah, so that was a shift in consciousness that was considered one of the darkest time frames in the Kali, in the Yuga cycles. And a lot of information got scattered and lost, things shifted, things were separated. It was interesting to see. There was such a, it's not quite the Dark Ages, but it was definitely one of the hardest points in human history that we can look at.
Right, especially if you see how people were being treated.
Yeah.
How people were being treated, how people thought about things like medicine. And I think it's pretty easy if people do some kind of historical digging to see that time period, life was really very, very difficult. So it'll be interesting to kind of consider if at that point in time having that Dark Age influence, if that particular series of transits at that time triggered things into that difficult space. But now, again, if we follow that idea, Sri Yukteswar's idea of the yugas being that we are moving into the Dwapara Yuga, if this shakeup might be something to a more positive end.
Mm-hmm. That's what I keep thinking would be a really wonderful thing, is that if we're moving more towards consciousness, and yes, we have these things that shift. One of the things that's very different in that time frame and in this time frame, these eclipses that are happening in 2020, is that we have the planet Uranus in the sign of Taurus, whereas and in that point we had Uranus in the sign of Aries at that one. So there was a strong square aspect from the outer planets to the outer planets, whereas in this time frame we have a trine aspect. So there's more.
Tell me where it was then and where it is now again.
It was in the sign of Aries
then. And in Taurus now. Okay, all right.
So 4 signs away makes a square, and then 5 signs away creates a trine, which potentially, so there's 2 different ways of looking at this. Potentially creates a more harmonious flow of energy when you have Uranus, the planet of new inventions and new ideas and innovation, one of the outer planets that can be associated with that, in a harmonious trine with this transitional dissolving aspect that's going versus a square. A square is going to bring a lot of disruption and sudden, where a trine potentially could bring a smoother transition, a more thoughtful transition.
Okay, so we're going to hope that that's the case. And we're going to hope that it is not the debilitated Jupiter giving us false optimism.
It's not there yet. It's in Sag now, so we're
that's true. You're right. You're right. It's not there yet.
But I do think that that's going to make a difference, is where the other outer planets are in relationship. And, my apologies, I haven't had time to do the massive amounts of research that this does take to get every single outer planet. I have not found the transit in our history that has Uranus in a trine to this situation.
Okay.
I haven't found the exact transit of this this conjunction and having all the other planets in the similar place.
Okay. Well, that's fine. We can just focus on what we do have, which I think is enough for us for now. So, okay.
So that was pretty interesting. The changing of the ages. That's an interesting theme for understanding this type of transit. If it is interconnected with the yuga cycles, then it's going to be interconnected with human consciousness, and where human consciousness has a role in collectively in determining the next couple thousand years.
Right. So are you looking at this, like the start of it? When are you defining the start of it? Is it just when Saturn, Ketu, and Jupiter are all there, or when the sun hits it too? Because I know you're focusing on the eclipses as well.
Oh, you want me to try to find the exact day that this?
No, I'm just curious. Like, what at what point are you feeling like, okay, this is when this energy is doing its thing?
I think it actually started with Ketu moving into the sign, because I think that's the node. That's right. The nodal influence. And
Pluto's already there.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So
Pluto's already there. Pluto's been there since 2008 and is going to be there until 2024.
Right.
Saturn moved down there, out of there, into there the very end of 2017. But now we've got Ketu, and I think that's got its own karmic pull to it, how it's going to affect the consciousness, the collective consciousness. So,
okay. So you're defining it based on, so it really would have started just recently.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. It was Saturn, Ketu, Saturn, Ketu, and then Pluto was already there. Okay.
Pluto was already there, and I mean, as I looked back on the historical, events, it's hard to pinpoint an exact month or an exact time frame that something's going to happen, because we're really stepping back and looking at it as a whole picture, a whole cycle of consciousness. So what happened in 549 could also include events that happened in 545 or 555. I think there's this whole buffer around that time frame that has its ripple effect.
Right. Well, there's windows where things are coming and going, or like you have twilight and the dawn and so on. So that makes sense. Well, so what topic? So we've covered quite a bit here in this particular little section. Next up, what would you like to go into, the actual discussion on the eclipses? Do you think that would make the most sense, or we listed 3 things in the beginning? Do you have any sense of the most important next step would be?
We could talk about the upcoming eclipses, and how those technically look.
Okay.
And then, it's just going to include, a little bit of information. It's not tons, but if you want me to, I can read the sorrow cycles too, which is kind of depressing, but.
Well, why don't we save that, and as well as the discussion on the eclipses, for our next talk?
Okay.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you for being with us again today, Channing. And we're going to continue our discussion. But for now, I think we'll just go ahead and let the viewers digest what we've discussed at the moment.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Channing.
Bye.